Okay, let's begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 7th annual Seawheel Clean Energy and Sustainability Extravaganza. We're thrilled to have all of you here with us today. Before we begin, I would like to mention that this event is being recorded. Some of our handles for Twitter are Ganza, Connect, and @LeadersInEnergy. I'm Christina DiBerardino, a Senior Account Executive at Direct Energy. I'm a board member on the Association of Energy Engineers National Capital Chapter, as well as Chapter Liaison for Council on Women in Energy and Environmental Leadership, known as Seawheel, from this point forward throughout our event. We see the future continuing to move towards sustainability and technology that allows for energy efficiency. Today, we will be exploring sustainability, the changes we're feeling from the Biden administration and their focus on clean energy, women's career opportunities expanding, and circular economy as we move throughout both of our panels. We have a broad array of interesting panelists here today to offer their insights into this world. I'd also like to mention that this is Women's History Month and honor all of the women joining us at our event today, both our panelists and attendees, whose work paves the path for others and continue to drive all of us forward. So thank you, ladies. As I mentioned, this is our 7th annual event. We've had the privilege of hosting in person at George Washington University, George Mason University, and the University of Maryland, College Park, all of which are our student affiliate chapters. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors today. Clean Energy Leader sponsor, Edison Energy. Environmental Leader sponsors, AECOM and Titan Power. And our benefactor sponsors, Your Business, Our World, and DLR Group. Thank you. Before we get started on our panels, I'd like to give you a brief overview of who we are. So at AEE, our mission is to promote the scientific and educational interests of those engaged in the energy industry and foster action for sustainable development. At our National Capital Chapter, we are the largest local chapter of a global network of over 18,000 members. We host monthly educational events supporting sustainable development. We offer a professional accreditation course for certified energy managers. We host an annual career fair for professionals in energy, engineering, and related industries. For Seawheel, the purpose of Seawheel, the Council on Women in Energy and Environmental Leadership, supports women in energy and environmental sectors. It provides networking and support in career development for established professionals and young women aspiring to leadership. Becoming a member, you get to attend local and regional events. There's mentoring programs, scholarships, training, and certification. And there are over 25 participating AEE chapters in the US, and we have 10 international Seawheel groups. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our National Seawheel Board for their continued support. Thank you. A huge thanks to Edison Energy, and representing them today, I'd like to introduce Doug Millar, who is also our AEE National Capital Board. Doug?
Hi, thank you, Christina. My name is Doug Millar. I am the Senior Regional Director of Edison Energy in our Washington, D.C. office. I'm happy to be here today at the 7th Annual Clean Energy and Sustainability Extravaganza. Thank you today for attending and just emphasizing what Christina mentioned. If you're getting an opportunity to join and become a member of Seawheel or AEE, I strongly encourage you to do so. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of members on Seawheel, particularly Janine Fennell and a few others on some projects. And I'm always happy to be involved in educational or training or networking event or opportunities, to develop energy projects. The field that we're in, it continues to evolve. If you go back as far as I do, when we first started doing energy projects, it was about creating utility savings. Well, the industry has really evolved. It's about being good stewards for the environment. It's about reducing CO2, creating net carbon neutral plans and strategies, reducing risk, increasing resiliency, to counter major events that are out of our control right now. And so with that, there's many ways to get involved. As the industry has developed, you may be thinking, well, how do I fit? And while there are a lot of technical opportunities, there's also design opportunities, project management opportunities, policy, research and development, financing and development. The way I kind of got into the energy industry is a lot of it is financially based. A lot of projects and strategies that are developed and interacted and move forward, do revolve around the cost and the return on investment. But what we are seeing is that the companies out there and industry leaders are driving a more important goal and drivers, to create that sustainable environment. As we're developing the technologies that we already have, as we're moving off of fossil fuels, there are still, I think, some strides to make with the solar and the wind technologies, but also there are many emerging technologies, and, it might be exciting, to just be in that field and just have the opportunity to be a part of what can develop from there. Edison Energy, we're a company, we're on a mission to empower organizations to conquer their biggest challenges in energy today, which there could be many. We have offices across the country. We also have offices and a presence in Mexico, Canada, Europe, and partnerships in Asia as we develop our business. As we're currently hiring, and one thing I like to do at these events when I get an opportunity to speak is please visit our website, click on company, and follow the links to see what opportunities we're offering. And if you see something that you're interested in, it's always great to follow the process, but also feel free to reach out to me directly, to learn more about the opportunity, or, to get directly in touch with the hiring manager. I'd be happy to help anybody out with that. They have a great lineup today, and I'm very excited about today's event, and I am handing it back to Christina for the next step. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you.
I'd like to tell everyone now that there is a Q&A box at the top of or bottom of your screen, and that's where we'd like you to submit your questions for all of our panels. It's open right now, so let's get started and have some fun. So I'm going to introduce you to Nikki Mehta. She is our CWHEEL team lead for the National Capital Chapter, and she's going to be moderating our first session. So Nikki.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here at the 7th Annual Clean Energy and Sustainability Extravaganza. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I work for Honeywell. I'm the director of our energy and sustainability solutions. And I'm very passionate and excited about what is happening with what's been happening this past several years with energy and sustainability, as well as this year. On this panel today, we're going to be focusing on clean energy within the new administration and women's roles and how they're evolving in the sustainability industry. With the new administration, there are some very exciting trends. Reports show that more than half, 52% of Biden's transition staff are women, with 53% of senior staff identifying as female. And 42% are people of color. Now, hopefully you've all been watching what's been going on at the federal level. The American Rescue Plan was approved by Congress this past week, but now Congress can really get started with some exciting bills, including the Green Act of 2021, the Clean Energy Standard, and there's a number of infrastructure bills that are also being considered. So it's shaping up to be an incredible year for energy and sustainability. Now, I'm excited to be joined at this event with some amazing, talented women who are leading the charge in making impactful change in sustainability and clean energy in government, education, and industry. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Ida Namor, who is the VP of Director of Operations and Energy at AECOM, as well as Dr. Kelly Loeffler, who is the Senior Advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. and Leah Nichols, who is the executive director for the Institute for a Sustainable Earth at George Mason University. So I thought what would be a great way to get started with our panel is to really understand what is their story, what was their path into sustainability. Kelly, would you mind sharing first what was your path and what is your story into sustainability?
Sure, thank you for having me. I feel like a lot of my path has been driven by being curious, challenge motivated, and data driven. So I kind of selected a few of my favorite data and research related figures to kind of help tell the story. So as a senior advisor, part of what I do is kind of dealing with anything that comes into the assistant secretary's office that assistance is needed on. But my more stable portfolio is dealing with or working with our programs on cross-cutting R&D in things like the Grid Modernization Initiative, and then also heading up a lot of our state policymaker outreach. And I'll get to kind of why I'm super excited about that in a sec. So coming out of undergrad, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I had just done a research assistantship, loved it, and Inconvenient Truth was kind of at the peak of its critical acclaim. And I was really struck by two data points. So here I show in the top sort of pseudo pie chart, the US generation mix in 2019. But at that time, solar power represented less than 1% of the US generation mix. But at the same time, more energy from the sun strikes the Earth's surface in an hour than humanity uses in an entire year. So that seemed like a really great place to start. I was going to do research on materials for solar energy conversion. And during my graduate work, I had some educational opportunities that really got me interested in policy. So after grad school, I joined the Department of Energy. This was during the second term of the Obama administration, and Secretary Moniz had stood up an office called the Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis. And that's the office I joined. And the mission was to do rigorous fuel neutral systems analysis to create actionable data-driven policy recommendations, which as a scientist was like, yeah, that's how we should be doing this. So I had the opportunity to work on a lot of different topics, and our flagship effort, the Quadrennial Energy Review, was this White House-led interagency document. So I had the chance not just to work on a lot of different research topics, but also to collaborate across the federal government, not just within DOE, and also be part of a really robust stakeholder engagement process. And so I think these kind of informed a few of the next decisions that I made. So with the transition to the Trump administration, there was less of an emphasis put on climate change and moving toward emissions reductions, but they were really supportive of nuclear power, which, as you can see from the lower left circular graph, nuclear power actually represents our largest source of emissions-free generation in the United States by a lot. It had been a component of my portfolio, but kind of given that context, I thought, well, let me work more on nuclear. Let me redouble my efforts in this area and work on their policy objectives. And one of the benefits of supporting this technology will still be those emissions reductions. And as I collaborated more and more with the Office of Nuclear Energy, it kind of became apparent that it would be more effective to actually be in that office to do the work. So I was able to transition into the Office of Nuclear Energy, directly supporting the Assistant Secretary. And I think being there now, there is such a profound opportunity with the Biden administration coming in with this audacious net zero by 2050 goal. And so the kind of bigger figure on the right, I wanted to highlight the the potential that nuclear power brings to achieving that goal. The cross-cutting R&D that I work on is kind of foundational for nuclear being more fully integrated into our energy system. It has the potential to help remediate some of these much harder to decarbonize sectors when you look at industrial applications and some of the potential transportation applications. But then the other component is, so I didn't know that nuclear was our biggest source of emissions-free generation in this country until I was working here. And I kind of consistently find that that's true for a lot of people. And so, working on the stakeholder engagement piece, kind of socializing the technologies and the potential that they bring, ensures that they are actually one of the potential solutions on the table. So that's, I guess, a little bit of how I got to where I am and why I'm super excited to be there, especially now.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Ida, could you also share your story? I'm introducing Ida Namor. She's the VP of Director of Operations and Energy at AECOM.
Hey, thank you very much. So on this slide, I'm outlined my career journey. So you can see here, my career path into sustainability started very, very early. And I grew up in a time and place where the hole in the ozone layer was growing, and there were fears that increased UV radiation would cause skin cancer on a mass scale. And Norway, along with the United States and Canada, enacted bans on CFCs and was a leader in making the Montreal Protocol a reality. The story of how the ozone layer was healed was a key influencer for me in pursuing a degree and a career in environmental science. I was convinced that a similar approach could be taken in response to the worrying trends about climate change that the IPCC was reporting in the 1990s. I headed to college just after the hottest year on record, deciding to go study environmental science in Hawaii. And in addition to beautiful beaches and year-round pleasant temperatures, Hawaii is an ideal place to study environmental science with its wide variety of ecosystems and climate zones. And after college, I got a job at the consulting firm where I had been an intern my last semester. And in that first job and throughout my career, I have worked to be on projects that aim to solve sustainability problems. And that really ranges from a research project to use fungi and plants to remediate remnants of military munitions in soil, to climate adaptation at the community level in the South Pacific, and very recently working with Montgomery County, Maryland on their plan to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions and create resilient and equitable communities. About 7 years into my career, I was introduced to Commercial Real Estate Women, a professional organization whose mission is to advance the careers of women in commercial real estate. As an environmental scientist, this was a bit out of my swim lane. But as a project manager and someone interested in growing relationships with clients, it was a great way to network professionally. At first, I had my doubts about joining a quote unquote women's organization. I was in my 30s, a mom of a 6-year-old son, and looking back, probably in a bit of denial about the realities of being a woman in a male-dominated field. I kept thinking if I just work harder, they'll realize what I can do and promotions and raises will follow. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. Being part of Crew gave me a chance to network with high-power women. It gave me access to amazing leadership training and the opportunity to lead at a chapter level before I was tasked with leadership responsibilities at work. And it was a safe place to learn, to fail, to succeed, and build confidence. And I can honestly say I would not be where I am today without Crew. I joined the Association of Energy Engineers in 2018, which gave me the opportunities to network with industry colleagues and build my knowledge on technical energy topics, which really helped me as an environmental scientist working with mostly engineers. And now that I'm in my 40s, I'm lucky to be working in a job that allows me to integrate sustainability, team management, and business strategy. And I still believe we can overcome the challenge of climate change through research and international collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida. I have a feeling many folks are going to want to talk to you about how to get a job in Hawaii. And last but not least is Leah Nichols. She's the Executive Director at the Institute for a Sustainable Earth at GMU.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. As Nikki just said, I am the executive director of the Institute for a Sustainable Earth. I've been in this job now for about a year. And the Institute itself is relatively new, and it's a new sort of construct for the university. It's tasked with, my institute myself, I'm tasked with creating communities of research and practice around in order to put research and scholarship into action for a just, prosperous, and sustainable world. And this is like the convergence of so many of my interests that it's a really good fit for me. But you asked about my story, so I thought and about how I got into sustainability, and that's actually a hard question because I feel like it's been with me all the time. Even as a kid, I recognized the importance of the natural world, and as I grew in the teenage spaces, understanding the relationships between the human and fostering good, healthy relationships between the human world and the social and the natural worlds. And so I will say I don't have a career arc. I've just been following my interests along the way. I mean, I didn't start out at the beginning with any set plan. I didn't even know this type of job existed back at the beginning. So sort of my guiding principles has been to do what intrigues me, what's interesting to me, and what I feel is most important, so that I'm always doing things that I feel like I'm making a difference in the world in the way that I want to be making a difference. So I started out as an engineer. I started out as an environmental engineer in order to solve environmental problems. My undergrad degree is in that space. However, as I was completing that degree, I started becoming aware of the fact that I really needed to understand the social dimensions of these challenges in order to make a difference. I had a really deep understanding of the physical, the natural systems, everything, all of the skills that I obtained in the engineering field. But I really wanted to start learning more about the social sciences to take it beyond that. And so I decided to pursue graduate study, ended up in a very interdisciplinary program where I was exposed to a whole variety of different social sciences, everything from economics to international relations and political science, and then focusing again entirely on the interconnections between the social world and the natural worlds in that space. However, while getting that degree, I was also exposed to the field of science and technology studies, which is studying science as a social process. And that to me was fascinating. It really captured my interest and as I sort of tied all those things together, I really started understanding that I wanted to be working on challenges of making sure that we were asking the right questions to address the challenges that face us in the world, and then also facilitating the intersections and the interactions between the knowledge production and the knowledge use, so that we can apply our science to solve problems. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I worked at the National Science Foundation for a little over 8 years, designing programs that again tied across that facilitated science that was transdisciplinary, tying across the disciplines, problem-oriented, and then also connecting with stakeholders and users. And now I made the transition a year ago to George Mason to work on similar challenges, but at a more local scale. And I feel like I'm much more in the thick of the action, if you will, because I'm working directly with scientists. I'm working directly with partners of the university to create these communities of research and practice. So that's how I ended up here. I'm happy to stop there and excited to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Leah. I think it's great that you found your passion at such a young age. And, being on the private sector side, I think it's so important to have public and private sector partnerships. So it's great that you're helping out and leading the charge there. So to our next question, what were some of the challenges that you all encountered in your career, and how did you overcome those challenges and those obstacles? Whoever wants to answer that first, I will jump on in.
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
We're all jumping in there.
Okay.
So I feel like there is perhaps an undercurrent, not all the time, but sometimes, of kind of, am I being taken seriously? Occasionally there will be, and it's never overt. There are sort of subtle behaviors or comments in meetings or things like that suggest that perhaps my contributions are being dismissed. To add sort of another dimension to that, I think I came in kind of prepared to expect that this might be an issue as a woman. One sort of complicating factor that I didn't expect was age is sort of another axis of that. And to give an example, I will probably never forget the first working group meeting I participated in. 20, 25 people around a table talking about issues in a particular space. And sort of as expected, there was maybe a handful of women. But when we got to the workforce development piece of the discussion, it very quickly transitioned to what could sort of be politely described as trashing millennials. And I suddenly became starkly aware of the fact that I was the youngest person in the room by 20 years. And to be clear, this was not like DOE, this was a cross-sectional group of people. But I sort of realized that being perceived as the age of the children of some of the people I'm working with, adds sort of another layer of unconscious bias. But either one, they're sort of tackled in kind of the same way. And I feel like I have learned a tremendous amount from my incredibly supportive and phenomenal supervisors who have kind of helped me develop I guess what I'll refer to as a polite but firm toolbox for how to either sort of undercut and prevent some of those behaviors from coming up. For example, introducing myself as, or having myself introduced as Dr. Leffler keeps me from, for instance, being mistaken as an intern. And I guess the other thing to note is, so you mentioned earlier that the administration is bringing a really large percentage of women into leadership roles. And the office that I entered DOE in, Energy Policy and Systems Analysis, our director was a woman. Half of our deputies were women. So I had just an immediate great set of examples for how to navigate career progression, career development as a woman, and supportive women who helped with developing that polite but firm toolbox.
So Kelly, I've experienced many of those similar sorts of things, but I think that the element that I think that comes at the strongest, sort of in a bias point of view, is in many ways disciplinary bias. So and maybe this is because I grew up in the age that, or the time that I did, but when I was in school and college, it was there's very strong sense of, the computer science, the physics, the math, that was the realm of men, and the biology and the social sciences, and that was the realm of women. I don't know why it was so prevalent, but it was definitely front and center when I was getting my degree. And so that still colors, I think, some of my experience in this space. Are the social sciences being taken as seriously as they need to, or the sustainability and environmental sciences being taken seriously as they need to be? It has never made me shy away from joining those fields, because that's where, like I said, I think it's the most interesting, and it's the most impactful in the way that I want to contribute. But it does worry me on occasion to, when it's being perceived of as a women's field, and maybe it's not so much anymore. Is it given the legitimacy? Is it being taken as seriously as it need to, as the world's challenges? I mean, these are huge challenges, global challenges that need to be addressed. So I'll leave it there. I've done a lot of work. I guess how I overcome of that. I advocate a lot for the social sciences. A lot of the work that I've done, especially at the National Science Foundation, and in some interagency contexts there, I'm really trying to embed the social sciences and making sure that they have a voice at the table, and that they are being and empowering them to lead, social scientists of whatever gender, to lead these sorts of science and questions.
I think that's a fantastic point, because we can develop all the technology and engineering solutions under the sun, but we really can't achieve deployment without the social sciences, and to make sure that the technology solutions are equitable and just, we need the social sciences. So point well taken. And I think that's something that this administration is really considering.
Absolutely.
Following up on that, it just goes to highlight how important it is to have diversity in decision making, right? Because I think a lot of the problems that and the challenges we've been experiencing in our careers is because power is concentrating among a group of people that are very like-minded. So whenever you're not part of that same group, you have to fight the perceptions that are all expected or maintained by that group. But one example is there's based on assumptions around experience and competence that's maybe different when you look different. You touched on this with age, when women age differently, people of color age differently than men. So there's an underlying stereotype around what you're able to do and where you're at in your career based on what you look like. So when there's more people that look different and think different in one group, that's really critical to overcoming some of the challenges that we have.
Thank you, ladies, for sharing your experiences. I concur. I think one thing that has changed a lot is there's more women in the field. There's more models that we can work with and improve our experiences. We've been skirting this topic a little bit, but what excites you with the transition to the new administration, their focus on clean energy? How is that changing what you're doing and the goals and objectives that you're trying to achieve for your organizations?
I can jump on that. It's very exciting. This is a very exciting time to be in. Somebody I was speaking with last week actually put it really well, and it feels like we have wind in our sails again, if you will. Like the interest, the energy, the focus on climate change, clean energy, social justice, and equity, and how they all tie together, aligns very well with what I'm doing at Mason and the faculty's interest that I'm supporting. Some of the things that are really exciting about his agenda is that it's so comprehensive. It's hitting climate and clean energy across the board, thinking about jobs, thinking about technology, thinking about the social justice aspects of it, understanding vulnerability, and addressing those sorts of challenges, thinking about reskilling and upscaling and creating jobs in these sorts of spaces. And then also, because I'm at a university, science-based, it's evidence-based. He's really pulling in the research and the data, which is so important in these spaces. So it's just exciting to have that wind in our sails again, and it will be able to run with a lot more ideas, a lot more projects, and bring this to life. So.
Yeah, to follow up on that, and this might be a good place to slide in that the views I present today are my own and not those of the administration or my agency. Just to follow up on what Leah said, yeah, it's there's this big bold goal of net zero by 2050 economy wide, and they're being comprehensive about it and pulling in all of those different aspects and looking to be data driven, not just in the physical sciences, but in the social sciences, and pulling in, those important aspects as well. So, I feel like for us, for the Office of Nuclear Energy, we are sort of empowered to move forward with some of the big, exciting demonstration programs that we had initiated under the previous administration, and we're really empowered to see those through because of how they could benefit not just the electricity sector, but sort of working toward that ultimate economy-wide goal.
I think an interesting side note from us in the private sector is that the lack of push for this in the federal sector over the past 4 years really has driven local governments and private sector to take on this challenge in a different way and not wait for the government to act first. And I think we're now in a really exciting space where we have perhaps movement in all areas that can really accelerate the change that we need to in order to get to this goal of net zero.
Just wanted to remind everybody, we do have a Q&A chat box, and we will be getting into Q&A soon. So put in your questions if you have any. And I just want to add the thing that I'm seeing from the private sector. I think in the past, commercial companies were, like, okay, we're going to do ESG. We have someone that produces our ESG reports, and okay, we've met our ESG goals. now the big change that I'm seeing is they're actually like really looking at their ESG goals going, oh, how do we truly achieve these carbon emission goals that we set, and how do we align our internal and external company objectives to meet those goals? And they're taking it very seriously. So that's a really nice shift that I'm seeing personally in the private sector.
Yeah, and actually, can I add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's something that we're seeing too in our company, and we're about to roll this out, but we're incorporating ESG into the strategy of what projects we pursue and what clients we're working with and who we maybe don't want to work with. And I think that's really refreshing to see that we're making those decisions as a company.
Oh, that is great to hear. And we're hearing that too from folks, that the investors that normally invest in them are coming to them and saying, what will help share your ESG goals? How are you going to achieve them? Do you have any? So the investors are really holding the industry accountable as well. So that's great. What is your guidance? What would all of your guidance be for folks that are entertaining or transitioning to a career in sustainability? You know,
well, I think
how
Leah
sorry.
said it really well. You got to follow your passion, right? And Kelly too. We're all here because we love to work in this field, and I think that's critical. And I think if you have a passion for this field, there's a way for you to get there. We have a variety of degrees here. I work with people who have non-science degrees, policy, or maybe something completely unrelated. And you can still find your way into this space and be successful because it's so new anyway that there's lots of new things to learn and jump in.
I would, and to build on that, I would say, yes, absolutely dive in, come join us. But also, I guess my advice would be making sure you take care of yourself and manage your well-being. These are some of the challenges that we're talking about in the space are massive, huge, wicked, complex. It's going to take years, decades, centuries potentially to really create some solutions. So it's too much for any one person to really take on. So recognize that you're part of a huge community of people working on these challenges, and take care of yourself. Make sure you don't burn yourself out, and keep plugging away.
That is really, really great advice. You know, especially when you're working on these, like we said earlier, these hairy, audacious goals that are going to take 10 to 20 years, and then when you start in it, and you know, it's hard to make like immediate impact, but if you take it slowly and one by one and create the right partnerships, that'll definitely move it forward. Any other advice you would give in terms of, because the whole sustainability, you know, I remember when I got into it, I was like, wow, I thought it was just about energy, but it's actually about food and energy and climate adaptation and climate change and agriculture. I mean, there's so many different areas. You know, is there any other advice that you would give in determining which area to move forward in?
I feel like that was one of the issues I sort of had initially, was that it's such a broad issue space, and there are, especially if we're looking again to decarbonize economy wide, that is going to require solutions in industry, in manufacturing, in agriculture. So it really is about kind of figuring out what topics interest you the most, and it can be in unfortunately or fortunately, just about any slice of our economy. You can find, you know, ways to tackle sustainability. And I guess sort of one thing to throw in, you don't even necessarily have to get a degree in a sustainability related field. There are tradecraft jobs that are needed for, you know, a lot of the installation work. I mean, there's literally all kinds of work in this space. You know, not necessarily just focusing on the physical sciences and the social sciences. It really takes, it's an all hands on deck kind of situation.
Absolutely, and that kind of dovetails with what Ida was saying around find your passion, do what interests you. But I would, and then keep an eye on the intersections, interconnections, and how your work intersects with everybody else, and build networks and tie yourself in. So try never to end up in a silo. Really, you know, you can go deep in one area, but always keep in mind, what are the intersections? What are the connections? What are the interrelationships? How does my work affect everything else in the space?
Leah, as you're working cross-disciplinary, what are the challenges you're seeing from that perspective in getting these cross disciplines? Because if you're an electrical engineer, you're used to, okay, I'm going to do electrical, and like, how do you get all these cross disciplines together to solve these larger problems in sustainability?
That's a whole hour of conversation in and of itself. But very briefly, a lot of what I do is help people identify the frameworks in which they're working. Sort of, I really understand the sort of how the way that they're looking at the world is in a specific way, and how it might be different in all of the different in the other disciplines, and then help people understand how to find common ground and create a common framework. So that's one of the ways I sort of on a sort of micro scale do that type of work. I hope that gets at some of your questions. There's thousands of challenges in this space, so it's not an easy thing to do. But if people are more aware of those intersections, those interactions, those different frames, those different points of view, the different values, and can be open to understanding those points of view, it becomes a lot easier.
And I think being a generalist is a discipline in and out of itself. I know sometimes I've got criticized because I'm not an expert in one thing and kind of a jack of all trades, but I think you have to, because you have to bring in the expertise in each individual discipline in order to succeed. But then you need people that are able to bring other people together as well to work cross disciplines in order to solve problems.
That's a really good point. Like we all have to work together. We need the depth, we need the intersections, and there's space for everybody to be working in those different contexts. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
And Kelly, when you made the transition from focusing on solar to nuclear energy, did you find that to be a pretty easy transition? Did you find a lot of your learnings to be applicable within the nuclear space?
So when I got to DOE, there was a little discussion about, well, what did I want to work on, especially since I had worked on solar R&D before. It was sort of basic science geared towards solar. And because I had been looking at, moving individual electrons on, a molecule or a set of molecules in fractions of a second, it was just such a completely different scope and scale of challenge that I pretty much just said, you know what, you see my background, put me where you need someone, and I'll learn, and we'll go from there, and I'll maybe have a little bit more intentionality with the next few topics I add to my portfolio. I think really just the sort of the curiosity and the willingness to learn is kind of what helped. And I really, in the first couple of years, did work on a lot of different topics. I didn't actually start with nuclear power, and that's kind of the direction I went, because I felt like the industry hasn't done a great job of telling a story as a source of clean energy, and that seemed like a fun challenge to work on.
We actually have an interesting question on our Q&A box that relates to that.
Yeah.
Kelly is asking, nuclear is emission-free, but how can you be supportive when it results in radioactive waste materials that we cannot find a solution about how to handle? How can we safely store these residual materials for thousands of years as required?
So I really appreciate that question, because I think it highlights one of the themes that we've had here today. So from a technology standpoint, we do know how to manage that material safely. The issue of permanent geologic storage is not one of science and engineering. It's a matter of politics, and it's a matter of stakeholder engagement. The politics issue is sort of one for Congress, but in terms of the stakeholder engagement, that is absolutely something DOE is working on. The Blue Ribbon Commission report under the Obama administration laid out a path forward on that, and that's kind of what the Biden administration is returning to. And so consent-based siting and looking at interim storage options and recycling methods. Happy to, this is just, something we could spend hours on all by itself. So sort of happy to follow up with Rick Bell afterward, or anyone who has questions about this issue. But I think this is one of those issues where the physical sciences sort of meet the need for the social sciences.
And not to make this a nuclear conversation, that was one of, when I did my master's in sustainability program, that was one of the enlightenments that I had, is that, we were always like taught nuclear is bad because of, all the things at Chernobyl and those kinds of events in the past. But, with the modular nuclear technology that Gates has actually invested $1 billion in, that, you could actually use that radioactive waste and use it in a positive way, in a safe way, and create emission-free energy. So I was just curious, Kelly, have you done any work or done any work around the modular nuclear side, or any thoughts on that?
Many. Yeah. So I guess what I would do maybe is either, I guess, direct folks to our website. There are several different demonstration programs underway right now looking at, so traditionally nuclear reactors have been these like gigawatt scale, really massive power plants. And there is a lot of work looking at smaller scale options. So not just small modular reactors, SMRs, which are generally referring to things that are less than 300 megawatts, but also micro reactors, which are less than, I think by statute, possibly less than 20 megawatts, but we generally are talking about less than 10 megawatts. So, these are new reactor designs that could, so one, diversifying the product offerings for nuclear technologies, but also sort of more right-sized to fit demand patterns in the United States and around the world. But I think these are really exciting options.
So we have another interesting question. I think there is a worldview difference between engineers and scientists and those more involved in social science activity studies. Not sure that it is much gender-based, but I'd like to know your political thoughts, know your thoughts on what a political scientist I spoke with recently said. Scientists and, quote, scientists and engineers think that when they have developed a better idea, a solution to problems, I'm just having a hard time fitting on my screen, I'm sorry, okay. That when they have developed a better idea, a solution to problems relevant to mitigating climate change or some specific scientific or engineering achievement, that the world will see it, understand the relevance, and adopt it. They get angry at the world when it doesn't happen that way. How to get people with this mindset to understand the need for social sciences?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna jump on it because I encounter that a lot. And there are really getting natural scientists involved in policy dialogues and really getting them engaged in understanding the intersection of values that occurs when we're hashing out policy is really important, because they helping scientists see that the way they see the world is just one way of seeing the world. It is a scientific way of seeing the world, which is has a lot of validity, but so does the validity of people who are making their living in and the solution that's being proposed by science could destroy that way of life, right? We have to engage in those policy dialogues. One solution, which is an excellent program, I actually came through it myself, is the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellows program. They bring hundreds of scientists, PhD scientists, to work in government settings for a 2-year fellowship. And embedding scientists in that space not only brings their scientific expertise to the government, but it also helps scientists start understanding the milieu, the policy milieu, the dialogues and the value discussions that are occurring in the political spaces and in the policy spaces, to try to find solutions that are workable based on the science, but also integrating into all the lives of everybody all of our citizens, everybody who's engaged in these challenges.
Absolutely. And I think, part of it is also sometimes we see problems in a certain way and it's like, gosh, it's so easy to fix it by doing this, right? But I think you have to also see the problem from other people's lenses and present it in that way to get that alignment. Another great question that we have is, what are your organizations doing?
I just throw one more thought on that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Increasing the diversity of scientists as well is also a really important way because you're bringing in more and more points of view into the scientific process itself. So paying attention to inclusion and diversity within the scientific spaces is another way of addressing that challenge. So, sorry.
No, that's a great add-on. What are your organizations doing to make sure women are included in the pipeline to advance their careers?
There's another question that's been, I think it was flagged as having been answered, but several people have pointed out it has not been answered. And I'm like super excited to talk about it. I guess, Christina, are you trying to give us a little time check here?
Yeah, I was just going to say we have about 2 minutes left.
Okay,
So,
all right.
All right, thanks, Christina.
So somebody is asking, what recommendations do you have for pulling men into the conversation of uplifting women within the decarbonization space? And it's such an excellent question. We could spend like 30 seconds on it because we've been talking a lot about the importance of increasing diversity for the diversity of thought in the solution development. But the fact of the matter is, the reality of doing this on a day-to-day is hard. It's hard. We have to overcome decades, if not centuries, of social norms and thoughts about gender and race, and it's not going to be solved all in one day. So I think what we need to get to is to recognize that diversity helps both women and men. And although it's uncomfortable perhaps for our male colleagues to step in and say, hey, I'm seeing something that I know my female colleagues won't appreciate and that's not right, and I don't want to address it, you have to help us out, be a part of the team. It's going to benefit us all in the long run, even if it's challenging to do in the short term.
To respond to the question around also empowering women in the space, one thing I do is mentor. I don't have a lot of official mentees, but if people come and want to talk to me about what a career looks like, I'm happy to talk. If they want to bounce ideas about challenges that they're engaged with, I'm also happy to talk. In a more formal sense, we do. In my organization, we do support, or I'm trying to build programs that increase diversity in these spaces, both of women and people of color, supporting student internships as well to advance their careers in this space. Something that we're actually actively building right this moment. So there's a lot to do in this space, but those are two I'd highlight right off the bat.
Thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate all of our panelists. Leah, Kelly, Ida, and Nikki, thank you so much for moderating this session. It was a lot of lively, wonderful conversation. I'd like to introduce someone who's been instrumental in planning today's event, Janine Fennell. Many of you know her as the CWEEL National Board member. She's on the board of the Association of Energy Engineers at our National Capital chapter, and she's Director of Leaders in Energy. Janine?
Thank you so much, Christina, and just delighted to be here. And wow, what a fantastic panel. Thank you for all your insights. And you probably saw me just making all these comments in the chat about, yay, I love that, I love that. So just great to be here. And what I'm going to do is just give a couple highlights on leaders in energy as a prelude to our next session on the circular economy, which is one of the topics near and dear dear to our heart because it is more of a holistic systems approach to including a focus on renewables and reducing waste and just being really smart in terms of what we're doing in terms of resource management and consumption. So can you get me to the next slide now, Christina? I'll just ask you, I just have a couple little slides. So what we talk about in Leaders in Energy is what we call the big green shift. And I know it's been touched on today, but scientists and others, we all know it, who are here in the audience, that a massive shift is needed in the way we think, work, and live. So here at Leaders in Energy, we have this bridge that we're working on to a sustainable future along the lines of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. The author Malcolm Gladwell describes a tipping point. I don't know if you've read his book or not, as that magic moment when an idea, trend, or social behavior crosses a threshold and spreads like wildfire. And we're working to create a tipping point for the big green shift by building our community of global leaders to accelerate clean energy and sustainability solutions. I know one of the speakers said, take care of yourself. You can get overwhelmed trying to solve all these problems. And that's what we really love about Leaders in Energy, is building a global action network where we can empower one another and work together to make these changes. And just a shout out, our Global Action Network has a reach of approximately 8,000 people through our community and social media platforms. And by way of examples, we have 3 Leaders in Energy reporters that are on our call today in our meeting, one from Cancun, Mexico, the other one from Stuttgart, Germany, along with a student from the University of Delaware. And I just really want to thank them for their assistance. Next slide, please. So how are we working to bring about this big green shift? This slide highlights 5 program areas that we're focused on. Green jobs, careers. That was some of the things that we were touching on in panel 1. And Doug Millar mentioned all the ways that one can enter the field and their jobs at Edison Energy. So we have a green career workshop and green career momentum program and annual conference. So we'll be talking at the end about some of these upcoming events. Our Green Career Workshop is coming up, information session next week. So encourage those. I see some students on the line, definitely welcome to join us. And then a green economy marketplace. So I will not steal Lara's thunder. She'll talk more about that. And then multi-generational leadership. I heard one of the speakers talk about how all hands are needed on deck. And we really believe in recruiting talent from all generations. And then lastly, green finance. We need money for the clean energy revolution and building sustainable communities through our Global Action Network. And next slide, please. So who are our leaders in energy? Well, there are a lot of people on our call that are part of our organization, but basically professionals working in the clean energy and sustainability industries, those seeking to enter these sectors, as well as individuals who want to get more involved by making a conscious shift in their lives and communities. You can see some of our leaders on the left here. That was from our 4 Generation Awards event. And also on the right here, we had a fundraiser at the new Plant Burger in March. This was right before COVID hit last year, with a bunch of our circular economy members as a fundraiser. So without further ado, next slide, I would now like to introduce Laura Ilau, who is one of our Leaders in Energy leaders. I'm just so thrilled to be introducing Lara. Lara is an entrepreneur and funded her own business, Plastic Tree, which is focused on the reuse of consumer products to extend their useful life rather than throwing them away. She's also the chair of our Leaders in Energy Circular Economy Working Group, which meets monthly on every 4th Wednesday. So an invite for anyone who wants to attend that. It's just a wonderful group working to implement circular economy in DMV region. Lara is a moderator of our panel on a circular economy. And I should also say we have a number of other Leaders in Energy leaders on Lara's panel as well, including Jim Schulman, who has worked with us for many years, and Emily Yates, who has also spoken on the circular economy. So it's now my great pleasure to turn the program over to Lara. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine, for that. Wonderful introduction. Hello, my name is Lara Elau. Good morning, everyone. I am the moderator for this panel 2 discussion, Building Back Circular. I'm thrilled to be here today with fellow circular gurus. And just to provide a minor background, in addition to what Janine had mentioned, I am the founder owner of Plastic Tree, which is a DC-based waste management company that collects for reuse with a mission to restructure the waste hierarchy to prioritize reuse. The last 15 years has seen a shift in economic thinking that has gained traction in cities, countries, and even corporations around the globe. Thinking of our economy as a circular system rather than the traditional take, make, dispose linear system. This circular shift was accelerated to the forefront in recent years as the implementation of China's national sword policy laid bare unavoidable truths about the waste we produce and discard. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our circularity leaders who have led, managed, and or implemented large-scale circular initiatives. First up, we have Emily Yates Giuliani, who is the Smart City Director for the City of Philadelphia for Smart Cities PHL. Prior to this, she served as the Deputy Director for Envision Charlotte, a project that made Charlotte the first city in the US to have a citywide circular economy strategy. Next up, Jim Schulman is the Executive Director for Alliance for Regional Cooperation, or ARC, dedicated to forming producer and consumer cooperatives, in addition to a 36-year career as an architect with a focus on building material reuse as well as land use and sustainability. Jessica Wright is the Senior Project Manager with Eco Preserve. She has managed and led a number of zero waste plans and circularity initiatives for major organizations such as Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, Orange County Convention Center, University of Central Florida, and Orlando International Airport. Finally, Megan Knowlton is the Sustainability Director at Optoro, a returns technology company based in Washington, D.C. She oversees initiatives that enable retailers and brands to build circular business models and to reduce waste and emissions in the reverse supply chain. Prior to Optoro, she managed sustainability programs at the Coca-Cola bottling system. I'll start off this panel discussion by letting everyone introduce themselves with a question on what brought you to your first major or current circular economy role? So Emily, why don't we start off with you?
Sounds good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me on the panel. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. So what brought me to my current role in regards to the circular economy? Prior to Envision Charlotte, I worked for a think tank in DC called the German Marshall Fund. And I led the Sustainable and Livable Cities work, where I exchanged best practices and public policy between cities in Europe and the US. And I went on a study tour. I led a study tour of folks from Pittsburgh, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Detroit to Amsterdam. And the focus of the study tour was energy economy. But I had heard some rumblings about a site called De Kovel, and I thought, well, that would be really cool to just check out and see in practice, especially since it seemed like a great solution for these post-industrial cities. And went and saw and met with a group called Metabolic, got a walking tour of their site and was just really enamored of the concept. And that was where my passion for this topic really grew from, and my obsession with the company grew as well. And so I moved to Charlotte in the hopes that I could actually have my hand on implementing something there around the circular economy. And I was successful in leading the development of the strategy, Circular Charlotte strategy, as a result of that. And then this opportunity in Philadelphia popped up under smart cities. And I really believe that there's a great spot for circularity under the smart city umbrella, because we all know that tech and data need to happen in order to enable the circular economy and the transition that we really need to have to achieve targets. So I'm here in Philadelphia working on achieving that under the smart city umbrella and really having an impact on a city with diverse needs. And that's a great opportunity.
Thank you, Emily. And Jim, how about you?
Thank you, Lara. Hello, everybody. As an architect, I realized that the reuse of building materials is about the greenest and most circular thing that one can do, because A, it inhibits the manufacturing of new products and associated energy and material inputs. And as it happens in the DC metro area, building material wastes are about 50% of those materials. And B, generally it makes economic sense to, if you're going to be transporting heavy things like building materials, it can be expensive. So if you are able to reduce the distances of transporting them by doing it within a region, you're helping with the circular economy. I happen to be the founder of a business called Community Forklift, which is a 16-year-old used building materials store. And I'm no longer affiliated with it, but I'm very proud of the business. And since I left Community Forklift, I've been active with the DC Sierra Club Zero Waste Committee. And that committee, along with the Building Material Reuse Association, which is a national nonprofit, and progressive members of the DC area construction community, we worked together to amend the DC residential building code to require that a small amount of salvage, we started with just 5%, and that's measured by weight, by volume, or by percentage of construction contract. So on any addition, demolition projects, or renovation projects, this is now required. It's now law by virtue of the residential building code. And these amendments contain lead paint handling protocols, so they better protect workers and the public. And these protocols and requirements can be met by salvaging building materials or by installing them in new construction. So you can satisfy this building code amendment on both the supply side and the demand side of the market. And the whole reason for this amendment was to help small contractors be able to realize that they could actually make money and get comfortable with the fact that they can make money by including salvage activities within their standard operating procedures. So the new code amendment has not been in place for a year yet. It's less than a year. So we really don't have a good sense of its impact or even the degree of compliance with the law. And as it happens, the DC Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs Green Building and Energy Division underwent a deep restructuring also in the last year. So it may be hard to figure out, but the Sierra Club does hope to engage in a contractor education campaign on this issue along with DCRA after the COVID situation eases somewhat. I must mention though that at the time
Jim, I don't want to interrupt, but there's background noise coming. I don't know if there's anything you can do on your end to minimize that.
Yeah, I was just turning my notes. Just last thought, our work might have impacts broader than we think, because we had a visiting crew from Ningbo, China, which is a city of 3 million, that came to visit with DC government agencies and the Sierra Club. And it was their whole solid waste division came and visited, and they had never heard of the concept of zero waste or working towards zero waste. So we do think that even though this particular code amendment is a very narrow, granular thing, I think the world is listening, and we hope to expand this, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Next, Jessica.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. So my career kind of started in a very different direction. I worked at hospitality, and I was a operations manager at a major university, and then I was an operation manager at a hospital. And over that 13 years, I saw an extreme amount of wastefulness in daily operations. And I was doing small little programs of, ways to recycle or ways to divert waste or ways to minimize the amount of waste made. And I finally decided to switch careers, which I'm extraordinarily happy about. And so I came to work for EcoPreserve, and they said, you have an affinity and a passion towards waste diversion. Why don't you kind of stick with that? And at first I kind of fought it because I was like, I don't want to be the trash lady. But it did seem to be a strength of mine. And so we started building the program and the service line. And I started having a lot of clients coming to us when zero waste became a buzzword. And they were like, we want to do zero waste. And I was like, okay, let's take a look. And we started looking at their operations. And the way that I explain it is, I want to look at everything that's coming in your front door and everything that's going out the back door. And once I started doing that, I started realizing that they were wanting to recycle, they were wanting to divert waste, but they weren't supporting the programs that made that possible. And I actually have, I want to kind of share, like, this sits on my desk. I don't know if you can read it, but oh nope, the camera's not going to pick it up. I can't pick it up. Anyway, so it's a sign and it says, if there's no one to buy the recyclables, it's trash. It's a very, very simple phrase, but it's something that I really emphasize with my clients, because we started having discussions around circular economy, and our program has built from there, because I've started to help them understand that everything that is coming in the front door has to support the programs that they want to minimize and divert their waste on the back end. And once you help them to understand the circular economy within their own organization, it's made a huge difference. And so that's kind of how I came to circular economy, was through the trash. And I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time, and we're starting to see some bigger impacts from some projects that we're working on. And every time we get a new client that seems to understand the circular economy and starts to implement programs and policies and procedures that support zero waste, they're supporting circular economy in kind, because zero waste is not sustainable without circular economy. So that's kind of where I came from and where I am right now. And I'm super excited for this conversation. I think this panel of professionals is so diverse, and that really identifies what circular economy is it's bringing all of the diversity and the right players to the team, and having the conversation of how do we get such a complicated program to work. And the only way is bringing all the partners to the table and having conversations such as this.
You're absolutely right. There are a lot of things that you just mentioned that I fully agree with and can relate to. And I see other panelists nodding their head at what you were saying. Finally, let's hear from Megan. I want to hear your story.
Yeah, thank you. So much of what you just said, Jessica, was something I related to. So my background is a slightly different systems than some of the systems we've talked about so far. We've talked about cities and buildings and infrastructure and airport projects. And I work in the retail system. Prior to this role, I was in the food and beverage manufacturing system, which I still see as part of that system relating to consumerism and relating to how we as consumers interact with products. And my background is more in that corporate sustainability, zero waste to landfill mindset, and recyclability, percent recycled plastic in your products, and when I came to this particular role with Optoro, was really when I started to take a more circular mindset. So Optoro, we're a returns technology company, and we make technology that gets implemented in warehouses that are operated by retailers and brands, and it helps them figure out what to do with each and every returned product that comes back from consumers, or maybe it comes back from the store, it's a shelf pull, or it's excess. We help them figure out what to do to keep those products out of landfills and prolong the lives of those products. So that's really when I started thinking along the lines of circular economy, and in particular, the embedded impact within any retail product. And so, you know, I'm sure as everybody on this call is aware, the majority of the carbon footprint of an item comes from its sourcing and manufacturing stage. So while my company, we can help our retailers divert waste from landfill and reduce emissions from extra transportation steps involved in the reverse supply chain, which I can get more in depth about. The reverse supply chain can be very inefficient. So we can help reduce those transportation steps. But what's, you know, kind of the huge impact of any program that keeps products in use is coming from that kind of embedded impact of keeping products in the hands of end users again and again and again, as much as possible, which goes back, I think, to Jessica's statement that if something, you know, or along with, kind of aligns with what Jessica was saying, that if something hasn't been designed to be reused, even if it was designed to be recycled, if there's no next step planned for it since its design stage, then it's going to be really difficult to figure out what to do with it at the end, or it's going to be trash. So that's where my company comes in. We're one part of the circular retail economy, but there's so many more other steps involved in that circular mindset that are necessary.
Thank you, Megan. I'll chime in just quickly to say that, as I said, I operate a waste management company, and one thing I like to tell people is that we get creative with our end markets, and we're willing to get creative with our end markets. So yes, that is very true. Finding, you know, what that next step is for any material that is produced, and if that means being smarter about the design portion of that and the start phase, that's and so be it. I do want to go back to Emily and ask about how your I'd like to hear about how your current smart city program in Philadelphia is different or the same. What similarities, differences are there with the Envision project that you oversaw in Charlotte, and maybe even talking about some of the technology that you used. Megan's right, you know, technology is a crucial, or I think will be a crucial portion of circular economy and implementing circular strategies.
Sure, I think one of the key differences between my time in Charlotte and my time so far here in the city of Philadelphia, I've been here for about 17 months, is the difference of working for a city and working with the city. In the role in Charlotte, you know, we were not encumbered by challenges around procurement. We were able to work pretty nimbly, which helped you know, support the city in developing the Circular Charlotte strategy and partnering with them on that. I think the similarities in both the work that I've done around the circular economy here in Philadelphia and what I did in Charlotte was that, and I know everybody on here is environmental, so don't think I'm not an environmentalist, but I really pushed it on the economic side of things. I think when you're looking at a city perspective, they're concerned about the environment, but their priority is creating jobs, creating economic revenue opportunities for the city, reducing costs. And so that's really what I try to target when I speak to city, to my colleagues or to city leadership. And that's really how I sold the concept in Charlotte was I said, you know, you guys are on the, you know, online for producing jobs that provide economic mobility opportunities for the community. You've kind of got these economic markers that you need to check. And I said, and the circular economy paradigm that you should be transitioning to, we'll check those for you. And by the way, you know, reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and help you achieve those global targets. And so that was how I got the buy-in from the city manager and council and kind of key leaders within the Charlotte government was they saw that. And then I took them to Amsterdam. And that was a trick I pulled from my time at German Marshall Fund is if you can get people to see it in practice, especially if it's a European best practice you're trying to bring back to the US, they realize that it can be done, that there are ways to kind of pick up the key pieces and bring it back to the city in the US. And so that was how I secured it. And then because Envision Charlotte was an NGO and not the city, we were able to get that contract quickly done and provide a plan in about 8 months. And in Philadelphia, it's been a little bit slower, but it's been a different approach as well. Philadelphia is 1.6 million people. We have a large government that does not have a lot of funds. And so the ploy that I've been using is leveraging mechanisms that I have in my toolkit, specifically a program we launched under Smart Cities called Pitch and Pilot, where we issue a call for solutions around a municipal challenge. Trash is a huge challenge here in the city. We do not have the most advanced trash collection process. We don't issue city bins with lids, so trash just kind of flies around our city. It's not something we are very proud of. And so we wanted to issue a call for zero waste to help the city achieve their zero waste by 2035 target. And we ended up coming up with some tools in a partnership with a company called Retriever, both focused on circular economy. One is around identifying where our construction and demolition waste is created and where it is needed. It's called an urban mining tool. And in the hopes that with C&D being our largest waste stream, we can actually create value for it and reduce the illegal dumping, which has an equity issue and addresses an equity issue here in the city. And then with the Retriever partnership, they do contactless pickup via app for e-waste and textiles. And we've diverted over 100,000 pounds of those materials since we started with them just under a year ago. So my effort in Philly is less about the strategy and more about just starting to get examples and showing them the value. And then hopefully we can develop a broader strategy for the city that we can kind of plug these efforts into that are more sustainable.
Thank you, Emily. That's interesting what you mentioned about the Miner app. What was I just had it in front of me. And so I want to ask Jim if you've had the opportunity to implement technologies in your strategy with regard to regional cooperation among different entities. I know that you can tell us a little bit about the work that ARC's done over the past few years.
Sure. The Alliance for Regional Cooperation is a newly formed nonprofit. We just got our 501c3 tax exempt status with less than a month ago, and so we're able to obtain grants and larger contributions. One of the things we explored doing was working on an alternative currency that would be cell phone based, and my board kind of rejected that just because we're a startup and the obsolescence of technology happens so quickly that I'm not sure we could pull off what they wanted to do. So I don't think we're tech savvy or tech employing yet, but I do think that the work we want to do is important, dealing with scale and dealing with a recognition that the metropolitan scale is the right scale for circular economic activity. And there's a lot of research to back that up. If we can regionalize economies across the world, we will have gone a huge way to solve many of our economic and environmental problems. And that's simply because all the economic studies that have been done on this have shown that if you shop or invest in local or regional businesses, 60 cents on the dollar will be reinvested in the economy, whereas if you're shopping from out of town or out of country businesses, only 40 cents of the dollar is going to stay in the local economy. So it's about putting money in people's pockets.
Thank you for that, Jim. One question I'd like to ask is, for Jessica, how did you get the initial, or actually this could be for the group, how did you get the initial buy-in from strategic people? And What were your most important collaborations?
So most of our projects are the leadership of a city or a large organization or an airport or a hospital will call us in and they have a big idea and they say, we want to do this, or we want to set some new goals for ourselves. And so one of the best tools that I've ever found is time, investing time with the right partners, and that's internal stakeholders. So that's sitting down and doing a workshop with internal staff. And I usually will leave top leadership out of the conversation. And I bring in mid-level leadership, and then I bring in, what we've called the boots on the ground. And we sit down and we have a conversation, and I ask them some pretty hard questions, like, what's the best part of your job? What is the most challenging part of your job? And, what do you feel like the organization could be doing better as a whole? And then I ask the question, I say, okay, if you could be the boss, for 6 months, what would you try to do with the organization? How would you make changes to benefit the community? And by asking those questions, we actually have gotten some of the best ideas, some of the most important and valuable, constructive criticism about either this is the way that they're running the company, or this is a product that we're using that we don't feel is necessary, or, when we're talking about circular economy and we're looking at things like, how is the waste being managed, or how is water being managed, and things of that sort. They actually come up with some of the best ideas. So like we worked with Dallas Fort Worth Airport, and they said, if they would just build us a building where we could work on our own fleet vehicles, we could save a lot of time and money, because we have downtime and we have expenses for taking them and having someone do all the repairs when our trucks break down. And because they have multi-seasons, they have snowplow equipment, and they have trash trucks, and they have all of this equipment that it takes to run the airport. And they had this really tiny, basically it was a shed that they were working out of. And I said, well, what would that look like? And so then, we spent like an hour and we drew up, the best case scenarios. And I said, this is a dream. And so all we can do is present it to leadership and see what happens. And so then I sat down with the other leadership and I said, okay, from a finance standpoint, what does this look like? Let's do a full life cycle analysis on it. And what does it save? So then we figured out that, they could start recycling all of the materials that come off of the trucks and the fleet vehicles and the fluids and things of that sort. And it saved them a lot of downtime, because they could do the repairs in-house and off time, whereas the shop that they were taking things to, they wanted to do it during traditional hours. So it was that conversation, investing the time to sit at the table with the right players and have the conversations, that's the tool that I have found most advantageous. And then, as far as technology, from a circular economy standpoint, there's accountability. Like accountability in the waste sector for circular economy is huge, because until we improve the quality of materials that are being diverted, we're not going to have a good market for those materials. So there's a lot of different tools that I use, and different vendors that we reach out to, and we test their products at the sites. And then, the customer either says, yes, that's amazing, it just saved me, $12,000 in 6 months, let's do it. Just this morning, we had a conversation with a large convention center, and we implemented a new technology there, because after looking at their waste reporting, I said, I'm pretty sure you guys are shipping air when they're picking up your bins, because they're not full. And so we implemented a new technology to actually see how much waste material was in there before it's getting picked up. And now they're changing their pickup schedules and things of that sort. So technology has a lot of benefits. It's just, we have to figure out the right place, the right people, and have the conversations with the people that see it every day and the people that work the work.
Hi, everyone. I just want to jump in and remind everyone, if you have any questions, please enter them here in our Q&A box for these panelists and not in the chat box. Thank you.
For that reminder, Christina. And I do want to add, because I don't believe I mentioned this earlier, but Fort Dallas Airport was ranked as the first zero carbon airport in North America. So congratulations on your work with that.
Thank you.
One thing I also want to ask, so Emily mentioned this, the difference between kind of Charlotte and Philadelphia, one having the resources and the backing, and versus working with limited resources. And so one question I want to ask is how do we invest in a circular economy without investing capital? And I'll open that to the group. Emily, why don't you go ahead?
I will just say this is something I grapple with on a daily basis. And I think, I think people are constantly surprised that the pilots that we managed to execute in Philadelphia are usually for $40,000 or less. And we're able to get some data around it and do a lot of learning. So there's minor investment, but massive impact because we're able to identify the right partners. We're able to collect a lot of metrics around it and learn from it as we go on. And one of the conversations I always have with my partners before we, proceed on a project is that we want to be R&D partners. We want to provide you with a living laboratory, but also there might need to be some adjustments made or learnings along the way. And we want them to be open to that as well. And I think that that's gone a long way in scaling up our projects for lower cost. But my motto this year as we grapple with budget cuts and not knowing what the federal funds are going to be coming to our city and all of that is partnerships, public-private partnerships. I think it's really key to identify ways that it's a win-win for both, and that, you're able to get that support. But I think, you have to be innovative to come up with ways that it doesn't require a lot of investment on the front end, at least.
Go ahead, Jim.
Don't have, and let me just apologize for those who are hearing a buzz or a hum. I get no audio when I don't use my headset, so forgive any background noise. We're, with this ARC project, attempting to work with regional small businesses and getting them to buy and sell from each other as a default position instead of getting the goods and services they need to run their businesses from outside the region. So theoretically, this level of circularity could be accomplished without investment. I'm very wary, though, of efforts to try to do things to improve our society that don't cost anything, because there is a cost. I could give examples, but I'll spare you that at the moment. But there are always costs, and so we need to look at not just the upfront costs, but the downstream costs as well. And if you're looking at all the costs, sometimes what you thought was low-hanging fruit may not be the only low-hanging fruit.
If I can jump in here, I'll agree that I think for me, a lot of the time, it's less about whether or not to invest capital in a circular economy project, but it's about framing what the benefits are for that project. And sometimes it's outside of what that circular benefit is. Often the key decision makers around these kinds of projects are not the people who live and work within sustainability or circular goals every day. So especially in my line of work, our technology helps hit the goals and KPI of the operations managers, the chief supply chain officers, the chief financial officers. And so for there, what we're trying to do is pair the sustainability and circularity benefits along with those key financial benefits, recovery on the dollar for cost of goods sold, reducing labor, freeing up warehouse space, those kinds of values. And so, if you compare sustainability value and circular value with those key benefits, and really putting it into the business case, then I think, that is where we've seen success along the way. Now, luckily, there are the entities out there, for me, retail companies who care deeply about sustainability and do have circularity or sustainability goals tied to their company goals. Maybe it's in their 10K, maybe it's part of their executive compensation bonuses. So, for those types of companies, it's really it's a little bit easier to put sustainability value up front. However, you do still need to tie it to the financial value. And I think I was just having a conversation with some of my coworkers yesterday, saying that, for me, what I'm most excited about is programs and initiatives and technology that make the less sustainable, less circular option also less convenient. So if you can try to replace parts of systems with processes that are more efficient, they're optimized, maybe they're more beautiful, maybe they produce less waste, so it's less of a headache. I'm just trying to capture examples across all of the different panelists here. Then you're really designing for the circular system just being the better system across the board.
I can tag on to that in the world of buildings and architecture, and this relates to a chat question about planned obsolescence as well. There's a movement called design for disassembly, where you actually are designing your buildings and your products so that you can take them apart into constituent parts more easily in order to refashion them together. Germany is way ahead on this issue. But ultimately, this is where we need to go, I think, as a society. We need to be designing our systems and our products to be able to take them apart without having to use a lot of energy.
Go ahead, Jessica.
I was going to say, a great example, and I think it was one of the questions in the chat, is EV is a great topic that you can take that as an example when you're talking about circular economy, because we're starting to see more hybrid and more EV cars coming out, and people are wanting to purchase these vehicles because they feel they're environmentally friendly. But we're also coming to end of life for some of the first gens. And what we're finding is that we've got stockpiles and stockpiles of pieces and parts from these vehicles and fleet vehicles that we don't know what to do with them, or we don't have the proper recycling set up for them. So, I go back to the European model of producer responsibility. And you ask, how can we make an impact without large investments? I feel like this has to go back to accountability. The producer needs to have accountability and the consumer has to have accountability. And once we start holding each other accountable for that, that's when we start seeing massive change. We started recycling in 1970. We are having the same exact conversation in 2021 with residents and commercial entities about keeping trash out of recycling that we were in 1970. The same conversation. Something is not working because there's no accountability for it. So I go back to policy. We work with a lot of different city and county partners. And so I see what the not having accountability, I see what it does to them. I see how the system is broken, not because they don't care, not because they're not investing. It's because there's no accountability. So I go back to EV. If we're going to build EV cars, then we need to figure out what happens to them at end of life. And that goes back to design. So it goes back to all of the points that we've already discussed, which is what circular economy is we design out the waste, and then we figure out how to build the recycling systems around what the material is. You know, we've got the tail wagging the dog right now, unfortunately. And I think, you know, we've talked about how do you move the needle? How do you increase the amount of diversion? How do you decrease the amount of waste? And how do you increase circularity? It goes back to accountability, policies, programs, and holding people accountable for what they're producing and what they're consuming.
Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate that you brought up the topic of policy, and that, as well as answering the question on the waste that new technologies such as EVs are producing. That brings me to my final question before we lead to the Q&A that's coming in from the chat. My final question for you all is, going along with policy, we've heard from Jessica on this, what would you say is what were some, or what was the most crucial policy or legislative change that you saw implemented that moved the needle within your organization or towards your goals? So I think Jessica touched on this Right to Repair Act. I don't know if anyone else has seen Rich Rebuilds, the guy who tried to rebuild Teslas from scratch and received pushback from Tesla, practically a cease and desist. He's been kind of on the forefront of these right to repair. I know that that's one policy change, but I'd like to hear from the rest of the group on other policy initiatives that should be discussed, that should be visited, that were successful.
I mean, I can start from what the city can do and what the city has the power to do to help accelerate transition. There's a variety of policies. We can look at our procurement and what we procure as a city and be more thoughtful about that. If we're talking building materials and deconstruction, we can create policies that require, similar to what Portland has done, that requires deconstruction of certain structures to be done where you can capture all the resources. I think there's also a need. I was recently asked if I thought policy or innovation and government goes together, because a lot of people say it doesn't, and I disagree with that. I do think cities are innovative. I think we just move a little slower with our innovation. So if cities could, and it makes sense, right? We are required, like our duty is to provide consistent services to the community. Like that's the basis of why we exist. But I think there also needs to be space for us to be able to innovate at a faster rate. I get frustrated by that quite often, just like the time it takes. So I think if there's policies that can be written around understanding that there needs to be innovation and there's inherent risk with that, and the city's okay with it, that could also really help accelerate a transition. But circular economy touches everything, right? If we're looking at policies and environment, that affects circularity. If we're looking at job creation, because again, to Jessica's point, if we're looking at the whole system, we need to be supporting things around facilitating the pipeline of developing the pipeline of talent around being able to design out waste. We then need to think about what we're procuring and buying and using as a city, and then how we're disposing of it and creating policies that support reuse of that waste. I mean, I know that there's a policy in LA, so we have a program here to address the digital divide called PHL Donate Tech. We're doing it in partnership with Retriever because they were already collecting e-waste. We said, can you collect computers, provide them to local refurbishers, and then they'll be provided for free to community members in need who have no access to tech. And they've been great about doing that. But one of the things I learned from their CEO, Kabira, is that when she worked in LA, she helped work with the city to develop a policy that identified computers not as waste, but as a resource, which allowed it to be reused. And a lot of cities don't have just something as simple as that. And think of how many computers. We have 25,000 employees in the city of Philadelphia. Like the amount of technology we go through is crazy. And so just even small mechanisms like that can have a huge impact.
Did anyone else want to chime in on the policy question? Megan.
Sure, I'll echo, I think Jessica was talking about extended producer responsibility. That's a huge one in both state level and federal policy within the US. And then of course in Europe, we see, much more well-developed and broadly implemented extended producer responsibility laws there. So if anybody here is not familiar with those, it's essentially requiring original manufacturers as well as retailers to take back products. And this also includes not consumer products, but things like, in the US, we have carpet extended producer responsibility, everything like batteries or light bulbs, those kinds of programs exist as well. It's definitely a patchwork here in the US and can be hard to follow along with, but that's certainly the type of policy that I've been following for a while. Then, of course, one that I'm keenly interested in from my line of work is a law like the one France passed last year, I guess, that will take effect in 2023, which is banning the disposal of any consumer goods to landfill, which is super interesting to me, of course, since my line of work is keeping consumer retail products out of landfills. So, I've got a feeling the US is pretty far off from passing a law like that, but it is the type of policy that I certainly follow and am interested in. I'd also say too, just thinking of the word policy, I work in the business space, right? So I tend to look at corporate policy and, commitments that companies have made, especially when they're public companies. You have to try your best to reach that goal. So I'm always curious about the companies that, are a little bit more agile and even the ones that are not, and get approval internally to make these commitments, like keeping, all of their products out of landfill, reducing, their carbon emissions to net zero, those kinds of commitments, and then seeing how they implement against those is always really interesting from a corporate policy place as well.
Well, and Jim, if you want to quickly answer, I do want to get to some of the questions that are coming in.
Sure. I just wanted to say that even though Europe is ahead of the US in many of these circularity efforts, with the fact in the United States that we have 50 different states and many counties and municipalities, there's a lot more experimentation going on with reuse. And so I helped investigate this. There's a huge spectrum of different ways of helping promote reuse of materials in the United States, especially in California. So, in terms of government policy, the whole reason we ended up doing a building code amendment is because we were forestalled from getting legislation passed to promote building material reuse. And so you have to be nimble if you're working on policy, even in government, to try another mechanism if you're faced with obstacles.
Thank you, Jim. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start reading some of these questions so that we let's see here. Okay, I've got one. Megan, who are some of the best corporations that you have come across in this regard in circularity policies?
Yeah, great question. Was just typing a response, so good timing. I think there are a number of companies out there that are already engaging in the circular economy space, whether they're talking about it or not. So a good example of that type of company would be Best Buy, who has been operating, I think, the longest standing and certainly the largest by volume electronics trade-in program in the US for decades. And then, in terms of companies with circular economy or circularity strategies and policies that they have published include companies like IKEA, H&M, Nike just published one, I believe. I think I saw Ralph Lauren just published one as well. PVH has one, some of these big companies, but then of course there are also the small direct-to-consumer brands that you'll see online that are maybe their whole model is based around a reuse or recyclable or rental product. Rent the Runway is a good example of reusable retail. And then, some of those brands I mentioned include things like, I think the name is Thousand Fell, or A Day, I think is a t-shirt company, I'm pretty sure. Just a few examples, but there's so many out there. Would love anybody to throw examples in the chat if you can think of any.
I'll just drop the name C2, which is a Central Virginia reuse business that resells any product that has an electrical cord on it. And our circular economy stakeholders group toured their facility, and I was blown away with how clean it was and how quickly they were able to get mostly government generated electronic waste back in the marketplace. So C2.
Thank you, Jim. There's a question here from Isabella, who wants to find out whether there are any policies that extend these circular economy principles beyond national borders. Are the environmental, social, and security considerations of materials sourced overseas somehow taken into account? For example, rare earth materials. So I'm guessing, is that a policy consideration that has been considered?
Speaking from the perspective of Philadelphia, no. Should it? Yes, but I think that that's a pretty advanced consideration. We're still trying to just get basic thinking around circularity in place. So, I think when we've worked with firms like Metabolic, they take those considerations into play, but I'm not familiar. I don't know every city's policies, but I'm not familiar with any US cities that have taken those considerations into place. Maybe Megan knows, potentially she's done broader work. Maybe New York City has, but otherwise I think the cities are still the US cities are still lagging in this space.
Here's a question from someone Navy based. I'll rephrase what I think they're trying to get at, which is renewable fuels. We've been focused a lot on the waste side of circularity, but I wanted to ask the panelists about policies towards moving towards electric vehicles or renewable energy sources. Maybe Jessica, you've touched on this with your work with the airports, and potentially Emily, Jim, I'm not sure, but what are some policy considerations, I guess?
I know a lot of the airports, they're not putting forward policies, but they're putting forward goals. So a lot of them have fleet goals. So I know that Dallas is 50% EV fleet. And so EV fleet does not include passenger transportation. So like the buses and things like that, but any of the other vehicles that are used on property. I think they're 50% is a 2030 goal, and then they have progressive goals from there. The MCO Orlando Airport has the same sort of goals, and they're both, I believe, Dallas has several electric buses for passenger movement on the property, and then Orlando is just starting to get into that with as the buses are phased out when they come to end of life, then they're looking at EV. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes into that because most of these buses, the way that they move around the property is they're only stopped for 5 to 6 minutes at a time, and they're used up to 18 to 20 hours. So in order for them to do EV, they actually have to expand the fleets. So there aren't necessarily policies going in yet, but there's a lot of goals being made. And then once those goals are met, then the team is going back and looking at policy and implementing policy. It kind of goes back to what Emily was saying, is you have to play around with it first with a pilot program, which is what a lot of the goals are. And then once you prove your success and you have a successful business model around it, then you can input policy. And one of our biggest things that we do with our clients is we actually help them write contract language that aligns with the policies. So let's say they put in a environmentally preferred purchasing policy, which both MCO, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, and several of our other partners have. What we do is we take that policy, we develop the standardized contract language, and that goes into every single contract, which can be thousands and thousands of contracts for these large entities. And what that does is it ensures that structural support is there to enforce that policy.
Thank you, Jessica. I want to thank all of our panelists today. I want to thank Lara for moderating, Emily, Jim, Jessica, and Megan. Great conversation. We really appreciate it. And we're going to be wrapping up now. I just want to let you know about some upcoming Leaders in Energy events taking place. There's a working group on March 24th, a green finance working group on March 25th, green career workshops on March 15th, March 27th, April 10th. There's the Green Jobs Forum on August 26th, and then the 4Gen of Leaders in Clean Energy Sustainability Solutions Awards on December 3rd. Thank you so much for attending. We hope to see you next year. Our email addresses for more information about our organizations are leadersinenergy.org, cwheel.org, and aeecenter.org. And lastly, I do want to mention that there is an upcoming AEE event. It's a virtual tour of a high efficiency office building in downtown DC on April 23rd. Thank you so much for attending, everyone.